Hi, today I want to talk a little bit about bungalows and quite specifically about adding an extra level to a bungalow, so an extra story on top of the existing ground floor bungalow. Typically, bungalows tend to be sort of single story dwellings, designed predominantly for those slightly later in life to make it very easy for mobility issues. And as a result, the prices can always be a little bit higher. But equally, if you are in a street where the bungalow is adjacent to sort of two-story buildings and detached houses and semi-detached houses, you'll find that the bungalow is slightly lower priced relative to those other properties, which makes them attractive to be able to then add a story and potentially enhance the value of the property. So things to consider if you're thinking about a bungalow and adding a story, potentially buying one, or you're living in one at the moment and need extra space. There are a number of ways to go about adding extra space to a bungalow. Typically, you'd go to consider, where are you located and what is next to you. If you are in the middle run of a set of bungalows, which is often the case, then it is likely you're going to be limited as to what the planning authority will allow you to do. And so you're going to be limited under your permitted development rights. And the permitted development rights specifically we're looking at there is kind of loft conversions. So potentially a hip to gable conversion with a dormer out the back that can potentially add you quite a significant amount of footprint onto the bungalow, and subsequently you get an extra level. However, that can often feel limiting, and so you're thinking, actually, I want to be adding a story. There are more restrictions around that, and that's when you want to think about, actually, what am I placed adjacent to? So if you are next to or within a series that is, slightly taller houses next to you, then it's going to be far easier to kind of convince the planning authority that you can add an extra story without impacting the neighbours and their amenity, but also the benefits of having the extra story can be considered in that context. Inevitably, if you have a neighbour that is a single-story bungalow, or bungalow in any case, then the impact on them may well be greater, and that needs to be considered with perhaps some sunlight and daylight studies to consider the impact on them. The other thing you then want to look at is actually, subject to when your house was built or when the bungalow was built, you can potentially add an extra story under a different type of permitted development legislation. And I appreciate this is all very technical, which is why you probably do want to get in touch with an architect if you are thinking about adding a story to a bungalow or how you can maximize the space in a bungalow. Subject to when it was built, and there is a range sort of up and it's capped until 2018. You can potentially add an extra story, but this particular type of legislation, this particular type of permitted development legislation is very restrictive around design and the impact on daylight and sunlight to the adjacent properties. So you don't see many of these sort of schemes going through. However, if your bungalow has lots of space on either side, then it might be prime to do that. And we have worked on instances where we have managed to add an extra story to a bungalow using that bit of legislation. Equally, we've worked with local planning authorities to convince them that actually adding an extra story to this building isn't going to harm somebody else. And therefore, when you add an extra story, you're effectively doubling the footprint of a property potentially. And don't forget, at ground floor, you can add an extension as well. And so therefore, as I say, you're doubling the footprint, potentially giving yourself a lot more space and increasing the value of the property. And so suddenly it becomes more of a family home, but starting from a point where it's far more affordable when you purchase it, because it's a slightly lower price point than potentially some other family homes, two-story family homes in the area. So really, when you're looking at a bungalow and considering what is going to be possible, there is, to a certain extent, a lot of complicated little factors to consider, but quite often it is a useful way to add extra footprint to your property.